Okay, Parashat MiKetz. In the Zohar, we say the prayer first before we learn from the Arizal. We'll say later. Bono Olamim Avnei Avnim Avarach Milaslichos Modim Anachim Ufanecha No Elohim V'Hayel Seinu B'Kedav V'Shtachavaya B'Kerov Tanu L'Torasecha L'Avodasecha Avodas HaKodesh Nasata Lanu Chelek B'Sodos Torasecha HaKadosh Ma Anu Menchayenu Asher Asisa Imanu Chesed Gedol Kazeh Okay, אנחנו מפילים מתחת מבינים לפניך שתמחול ותסלח לכל חטאותינו ועוונותינו ואל יהיו עוונותינו מבדילים בינינו לביניך וכן יהי רצון לפניך אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהינו שתכונן את לבבינו לירשת לאהבתך ותקשיב אוזנך לדברינו אלה ותפתח לבבינו הערה בסודות תורתך יהיה לימודנו זה נחס רוח לפני כיסא כבודך קריח ניחוח ותציל עלינו אור מקור נשמתנו בכל בחינתנו ושיצנוצצו צוצos avadach הקדושים אשר על ידם גליס דברך אלה בעולם בזכוס אבוסם ובזכוס תורסם ותמימוסם וקדושתם יעמוד לנו לבל נכשל בדברים אלה בזכוסם תאיר עינינו במה שאנו לומדים כמר עיניים זמירות ישראל גל עיני והביטה נפלאות מישראל כי אדוני ייתן חוכמה מפיו דעת ותבונה ורצון עם מפיו היום בפניך אדוני צורך לגוע עלי. So the parsha starts Vahi MiKetz Shnatayim Yamim Ufar Cholem V'Hine Omed Al HaYaor. Starts off at the and it was at the end of 2 years, and Pharaoh was dreaming, and he was standing on the banks of the river. Okay, it's an interesting thing. The Zohar starts off Vahi MiKetz Rabbi Chia Patach Ve'amar Ketz Sam L'Choshech. Ulechol tachlis uchoker even afel tzamavis. I cried more. It's very interesting. There's a misconception in amongst people, I think, or amongst spiritual traditions, in terms of how we look at how we look at the world. Do we look at the world in terms of it being a good place, a bad place? Is the world obviously the world is made by God, but how do we deal with the fact that the world seems to be a little bit of a mix of both good and bad? So it's possible a person can be in the world and obviously it can be not such a good experience, but also, unfortunately, a person can then look at the world in a negative way. And sometimes being religious or being in touch with some spirituality can augment looking at the world in a negative way. And that's really that's part of what the Zohar is going to deal with in this week's Parsha, that we shouldn't look at the world in a negative way, and that the Torah and our learning and our growth in Torah is all to engender us to look at the world in a positive way. That it has to do with always augmenting the positive, and that looking at the world as a negative place or looking at things that as negative is not really what the Torah is there for. Which is interesting because there's so many isurim in the Torah. There's so many things the Torah tells us not to do. You might assume that therefore those things are bad, and they are, some of them, right? Obviously some of the things the Torah tells us not to do are bad, but you shouldn't, so to speak, mistake the guidebook telling you what you should and shouldn't do for looking at the entire picture as being negative. Just because there are negative things that the Torah, tells you not to do, doesn't mean that the world is a negative place. Hold on a second. Let's see. Hey, good morning.
Sorry I'm late.
No, it's fine. Come on in.
You want to sit here?
Please. Thanks for coming. So we're just talking about it's possible in terms of spirituality, where you have a system that tells you what's right and what's wrong and what you should and shouldn't do, and points out negative things in the world that you should avoid, that you might mistake the world for being a negative place. And therefore, when you engage in spirituality, when you engage in the Torah, it might seem to augment the negativity of the world. So, I can't do this and I can't do this, and then you walk in the supermarket and you look and there's it's filled with things you can't do, and so then you might mistake. You say, "Whoa, what a gross place! It's all filled with things I can't do." So then it could be that the keeping of the Torah, the being engaged in Torah, could foreseeably make a person more negative towards the world, which is not it. Which the Zohar, again, what's talking about this week is that's not the intention of the Torah. The intention of the Torah is the opposite, really. It's to make the world a much more positive place. It would be like, if you're going on a very, let's say, you're driving on a road and you had a map of where all the big potholes were. You would go out of the way of the potholes, but it wouldn't necessarily mean that the place you're in is bad. It just would mean that you're lucky to have a guide. You don't destroy your car or hurt yourself. It just would be it has almost, in a sense, just because there are things, just because it's telling you where you shouldn't go doesn't mean that the place itself is bad. It's just there are dangers there, and so the Torah is giving us kind of like a heads up as to what we should avoid. But it has nothing to do with, again, the place itself is very good. And I think it's a misconception, and this also is very interesting learning in the Zohar, because you have specifically in traditions of mysticism, there seems to be a tendency to put down the physical. The spiritual is really where it's at, and the physical is negative, and you have to avoid the physical. And these are all seem to be tendencies people, or at least people associate with mysticism. And then you have asceticism also associated with mysticism, and also even in Judaism, really prior to the Baal Shem Tov. That was one of the Holy Baal Shem Tov's big chidushim, not only in the world of just Hasidus. I mean, he was, obviously the founder of modern, or whatever, Hasidic movement, and excuse me, but prior to, one of the things he did in general in mysticism was he was also a leader in the world of mysticism, as much as the Arizal was, I think. Again, the Baal Shem Tov has been, again, he's associated with Hasidism, and rightfully so, but really at the time when he came on the scene, so to speak, he was as important, I think, to the mystical community, the people who study mysticism, as was the Arizal. Maybe that's wishful thinking, or maybe not quite the whole picture, but I think there's some truth to that he did a lot. And I think in terms of how we approach mysticism, or how we approach that tradition, I think.
Sorry, which Rebbe?
The Baal Shem Tov.
Oh, the Baal Shem Tov.
Yeah. The Holy Baal Shem Tov. I think how we approach spirituality and mysticism changed drastically from him. And one of the things he taught was that we don't employ asceticism anymore. We don't put down the physical world in terms of in being Jewish. It's not our way, and we talked about it before. The Holy Baal Shem Tov's way of being both on the highest level of Ruchaniut, spirituality. Oh, morning.
Sorry,
morning. Come on in.
I didn't want to interrupt.
No, it's great. Not interrupting. It being on we're talking about the Holy Baal Shem Tov, and approach to spirituality, and this approach to specifically spirituality in relation to the physical world, and how we approach being in a world where there's negativity, and where the Torah tells us, don't do this, and this. There could be a tendency to then associate that world that it tells us don't do this, and this. There could be a tendency to then look at the world as being negative. And then the more religious you become, right? The more it seems like the world is negative because you're trying to push out all these things that you can't do. And we're saying how that's not a proper approach, and that's not what God meant. That's not what the Torah means. And so that's one of the very exciting ideas, right in the Zohar. Again, so we're talking again. There's this misconception of spirituality, in spirituality or in mysticism, that asceticism or pushing aside the physical or looking at the world as gross and only spirituality as important. That's what it's all about. That's being a mystic means that you abhor the physical world and you roll in snow and whatever and all that type of stuff, which people did and Jews have done. It was part of, it's not only in monasteries that things like that happened. We Jews also did that, and it's just saying how the Baal Shem Tov, one of his chidushim, one of the things he brought to the Jewish world was the idea that we don't do that anymore. That we don't. I mean, he gave many explanations for it, but he just basically said we don't engage in asceticism. It's not our way. And it's interesting then knowing that, and then looking at something like what even the beginning of the Parsha in the Zohar, what the Zohar talks about in avoiding becoming negative about the world. And how actually to be engaged in Torah is to be positive about the world. So it says MiKetz. So it quotes another pasuk. V'amar ketz sam l'choshech. There was an end was given to the darkness. So MiKetz and ketz, from the end, right? So we have this week's Parsha is really the beginning of the redemption of the Jewish people from Egypt. So it's the end of MiKetz. It's very interesting. It's the end of 2 years, but it's the end of Yosef's imprisonment, and it's also the beginning of the real redemption, the whole cycle that then brings about the redemption of the Jewish people. So the individual and their confinement, right? We limit ourselves all the time, but God is always giving us unlimited. We just can't see it, right? Because we're limiting ourselves. So we're confined, and so when we're able to come out of our own confinement, our own preconceptions about reality, and simply live in the moment with what God's giving us right now, as opposed to what we think we want or what we wanted, or who we think we should be or who we think we shouldn't have been in the past. When we can live right in the moment and just accept that God is giving us right now, so that's coming out of confinement. So MiKetz, so it's the end of Yosef's confinement, and that's really in a sense the quintessential, I think, concept of a tzaddik isn't necessarily that the person's perfect. It says v'amech kulam tzaddikim. Your whole nation are tzaddikim. It doesn't mean that everyone's perfect. Oh boy. It doesn't mean that everyone's perfect. What it means is, maybe. What it seems to mean is that all of us have this ability to serve God in the world, and in order to do that, we have to be. Hold on a second. In order to do that, we have to be. In order to serve God in the world, we have to be cognizant of God right now, right? Not later, not even in a holy way. When I say, okay, well, I'm going to shul this morning, I'm going to go daven with a minyan. It's really going to be good, and right. It's not even that. It's not even necessarily when. Again, when I'm davening with the minyan, or I'm doing something holy, right? Because that's later, right? And then when I get to shul, I'm thinking about something else. When I get somewhere, I think so. It's really, it's really to do with. I'm getting paged here. It's really to do with
somebody's trying to escape.
Someone's trying to escape. Yeah. We gotta just try the. I can't.
You could take a few minutes and try to work it out. Don't worry.
Yeah. Hold on. Let me see here. Okay, that's fine. Again, in order we have to come out of our confinement. So we confine ourselves. It's a neat experiment. Like just like what would my life be like if I just actually accepted what God was giving me right now? Like not if I and we go between these two things like that again. We're like active and passive. I mean, on the one hand, that's very passive. On the other hand, it's also it can lead to great action because you become aware of stuff that you weren't seeing before because you were so busy being active and trying to do stuff in the world that we tend to lose sight of those things that are right in front of us. Those great blessings that are happening with us all the time. And so it's again, Yosef comes out of confinement, and so he's again. So and in that place, then your future and your past also become fixed. Because you realize that if you're in touch with God, so God is not limited by time or space, and so you can be in touch with a place that actually can fix both your present and past and future.
I'm sorry,
yeah.
I don't really understand the concept of in that moment your past and future are fixed. What do you mean by that?
So well, it's not necessarily that they're fixed, but sometimes we think about past events. It's a normal human thing. We think about past events, regrets, or mistakes, or things we did or didn't do, and then we also think about things in the future. I want to do this, and I have this goal, and I want to go here. And oftentimes, and that can be helpful and good, but the problem is we end up doing that to the exclusion of right now, and so therefore the past and future become our boundaries. They become our confinement because we're never in the present, right? So those things become our bookends, and we look at ourselves as being in between the past and present, and going from one to the other, and we're never really right here. And so it's like being confined. So when we focus in then on the present, again we can go beyond the confinements of the past and future. And then those things, that we were worried about, or that we regretted, or that we whatever it is in the past or the future, those things become fixed, or can be at least, because now we're in touch with the one who's beyond those and who created all those things and was there the whole time, and God can fix those things. Whereas we can't go in the past, and we really can't go in the future. But God is in all those things simultaneously. So. But we can only access that when we're in the present. So this is this MiKetz, the end, right? It's a time. MiKetz Shnatayim Yamim. Yosef is going, so it leaves the confinement of time in a sense, and comes into the present, comes into his potential, and that's the beginning of. That's the beginning of the redemption of the Jewish people, and it's. Again, it's one Jew. I mean, obviously there were only, not so many Jews at that point yet. There wasn't yet a Jewish people. But Yosef, basically, the Jewish person coming out of any sort of confinement always has to do with, whether it's spiritual or physical or whatever it is, always has to do something with the redemptive process. Right? Because we have these, each one of us has this potential to do not only really good things and great things and be good people, but we have a connection with the redemption and the redemptive process of mankind. So the first thing to do is Kate Sam Lachoshech, that there is an end to the dark. The darkness has an end. The Dayu Kates de Smola, the Sa'et Ba'alma, the Sa'et La'ela. It's very interesting. It's kind of almost like a play on words. It's the Kates of the left side, meaning the side of Gvura, says the Zohar. But it's so meaning the Choshech, the negativity, the darkness, is this conception of harsh judgment. Right? It's just over and over and over in the Zohar talks about judging harshly as totally not a value that we want anything to do with, even if it does exist in the upper worlds. It's not a Jewish value, judging harshly. Period. But it's also the Zohar seems to be saying here, Kates de Smola, meaning that way of looking at the world, judging negatively always and judging negatively and harshly, is very limited. It in itself is a case. It's limited. It doesn't go anywhere, right? So it's almost like sometimes like you find yourself, you get in this like political discussions, and you're and you're wrong, and the other person says no, you're wrong, and you're going back and forth, and finally you win the argument, and it's like you always have that feeling afterwards, like, well, so what? Oh, what a letdown. Okay, I won the argument. Who cares? Because it really, it does not go. It's not going anywhere. It doesn't propagate anything positive. It's just so you won. You made the other person look bad, or you defeated their argument, and it's not going anywhere. Which is interesting. One of the things in the Gemara and the Talmud, the arguing and the trying to unravel the other person's argument, it's not because you're trying to win the argument, or you're trying to put the other person down, or the Amoraim, the Tanaim. It's going somewhere. They're always trying to get to what is the truth, and so the arguing it's different. So maybe it's like a tikkun. It's teaching us how the Gemara is teaching us how to judge favorably, which actually ties in very much what the Zohar goes on to talk about in learning Torah. Learning Torah is the way we learn how to look at the world positively. Right, so it seems like it could be the opposite. I mean, it seems like it sometimes can be the opposite, but that's not the intention. The intention is and I think that's a klal. Anytime you learn with yourself, with others, with a teacher, whatever, it should always leave you with something positive. It should always leave a positive impression. It should never make you feel worse, either about yourself or about others or about the world. It should always make you feel more positive, either about yourself, about others, or about the world in general. That doesn't mean that it doesn't deal with negative things or very kind of heavy and deep ideas. It does, but it should always be in a way that leads towards something positive. Whereas just judging negatively, it doesn't go anywhere. So Kates de Smola. So it's a kind of a play on words. The Ihu Se'et Ba'alma, and why? Because this view of the world, of hating, is really, it hates the world. Se'et Ba'alma, it hates existence, and that's a terrible value. The Se'et La'ela, and this way of looking at things in the heavenly realm, so to speak, in the world of truth, is hated, right? The aspect of looking at the world in a negative way and judging the world negatively that way is hated in the other world. V'kaima kama kuchabriku v'asti v'katri al alma, and this negative aspect does exist in the other world, and all it does is contradict and accuse. It's always contradicting and always accusing. It's an accusatory way. Again, we have to be very careful in how we engage spirituality, that we don't become accusatory. There's nothing wrong with non-kosher meat. It's just we can't eat it. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just God told us not to eat it. There's nothing wrong with the world as it is, so to speak. I mean, there's plenty to fix, but the world's a great place. It's just that there are certain aspects of it that we as Jews aren't allowed to engage in. But again, not because God wants us to limit us somehow, but because He wants us to go in a certain way that's unlimited. It's like I always say about Shabbos. On Shabbat, you're told, you shouldn't drive in a car, right? Because it makes a spark. And making a spark is one of the 39 malachot that we're not allowed, the 39 types of action we're not allowed to do on Shabbat. So the question is, well, why? It seems like God's trying to limit me. He's limiting me in terms of I can't drive, I can't go anywhere. And really, the truth is that, it's not that. It's just that how far could you possibly drive in one day? I mean, you know, like, I don't know, maybe 800 miles, 1,000 miles? I mean, if you're really crazy, I mean, you know, drive for 18 hours straight, maybe you get 1,500 miles, I don't know. I mean, fine, it's far. But you know, on Shabbat, when you make Kiddush, I mean, you're traveling to, like, beyond the galaxy, beyond the physical universe, you know? You're traveling, when you open up a Sefer on Shabbat, you're sitting with the Rebbe who's in another world. You're totally beyond. It's way beyond. So by limiting what we can do physically, it opens up a type of travel that's way beyond the physical. And so the limitation is only there to open us up to something even greater. And the focus always has to be then on the even greater, on the positiveness, where what the limitations are not there simply to limit us. God is not interested in limiting us, and nor does He need it. He doesn't need it. It's not for God, right? God doesn't need anything we do necessarily, but He wants to give to us something. That's another very important concept that the Zohar is always. God wants to give us something really good, but in order to get that thing, we have to limit ourselves, and so the Torah gives us guidelines by which we limit ourselves. And then, therefore, naturally, when you limit yourself, you open yourself up to something else. Again, the danger can be that you get into the limits. You know, people think it's about the limits. It's not the limits are there again so that you can have a even better experience, to open you up to something even more. But there are, so to speak, forces in the other world and in this world that they're into all they're into is the limits. The limits are in and of themselves something. Again, MiKetz, Yosef comes out of this place of limitedness, of being into the limited. That's a type of exile. The Jewish person is only into the limits, and not into the direction in which, when you're limiting, so you can't go here, you can't go here, you can't go here. What you're doing is you're directing the person to, go there, go that direction. And so all of a sudden, the Jewish person wakes up and says, "Oh, wait a minute, all these years I thought it was just about being limited, but actually all those limits are pointing me over to go over this way." And so that's like you're waking up. You're coming out of the cage. You're coming out of the limitedness, and you realize that, again, it's like the same with being in the past or future. Those things being stuck in the past or being obsessed with the future or some combination thereof limits us in the present. Whereas being in the present and limiting our own minds from dwelling too much on the past or the future opens up everything, right? So it's the same thing with the laws of the Torah. The limiting is, again, only there to open us up to something much greater. So this negative force, all it wants, right? All this negative force wants, none of it is for the good. Negative judgment, harsh negative judgment. All it wants to do is constantly attack, constantly destroy, and to bring complete destruction on the world. Because again, it hates the world, right? And so there's this. All right, if you want to talk, obviously, we can talk about the other world, and we have angels, and it's like the whole drama we have on Rosh Hashanah. Where we have the accusing angels, and we have the angels who are the defense lawyers, and it's this whole legal drama or something. Which is very interesting, what do I know? I mean, maybe it's really happening, or it happens. But it seems to me that what the Zohar is really talking about is us. That we human beings and we Jews, we have to be careful, again, because we're constantly looking at, I can't do this and I can't do that, and we're constantly judging what I can and can't do. There's a danger there that we become. We negatively associate the world with those things we can't do, and so we say those things are asur and we can't do them, and so therefore the world is a gross place because look at all the stuff I can't do. Right? Whereas again, the point being,